The ship from Palermo moved like a tired beast across the Atlantic. Not quickly, not cleanly. It groaned and rocked as if it resented every wave that slapped against its wooden skin. On board, men were stacked like crates, breathing stale salt air and hope. Some coughed, some prayed. Most just stared. Giuseppe Morello didn't pray. He stood near the rail, fingers stiff, his left hand clenched in that familiar curl that never straightened. The twisted fist they would one day fear, though no one feared it now. It looked almost pitiful, like a claw that belonged on something sick, not someone dangerous. But that hand? That hand would one day hold the spine of a city. At 22, Giuseppe's eyes had already seen more than most men twice his age. Sicily taught him young. You don't wait for justice. You don't expect peace. You take what's not given. He didn't speak much during the journey. When he did, it was soft. Not because he was gentle, but because he didn't need volume. He watched. He memorized faces. He listened to the accents, the whispers about America. Gold in the streets, jobs for anyone with hands. He looked at his own hands. One strong, one crippled. He grinned a little. The harbor came into view on a gray morning. New York didn't shine like the stories said. The skyline wasn't grand yet. The air smelled like wet metal and old smoke. But to the men on that ship, it was everything. They docked at Ellis Island, where names were chewed and spat out wrongly, where men were prodded like cattle. Giuseppe passed through with barely a word. The clerk looked at the crooked hand, frowned, and wrote something down. Giuseppe said nothing. By nightfall, he was on Canal Street, walking slow. The buildings loomed close together, casting long shadows. People moved in clusters, Italian, Irish, German, all pushing for space, food, work. He wasn't impressed. He didn't come here to work. He came here to build. You can't plant roots in stone, his uncle used to say. You crack it first. That night, he slept in a tenement with 6 others on a mattress that smelled like sweat and mildew. He didn't sleep much. The room was loud. The city had its own voice. Wagons, drunks, boots on cobblestones, dogs that didn't know when to shut up. But Giuseppe listened through it. He heard a pattern in the noise. He got up before dawn, put on his coat, too thin for the September chill, and walked. Past butcher shops where blood ran down into gutters. Past bakeries where old men shouted in Sicilian and slapped dough like it owed them money. He noticed who carried knives on their belts, who walked in pairs, who kept their eyes low. He found a tailor's shop with a cracked window and asked for work. The old man shook his head until Giuseppe showed him how fast he could sew with one hand. The left hand, the claw, couldn't thread a needle, but it could hold cloth steady like a vice. The tailor gave him a corner seat. That was how he started. Not with bullets, not with blood, but with buttons and silence. At night, he'd sit on the stoop and watch the boys run numbers. Listen to the older ones talk about loan sharks and muscle. He never asked questions, but he caught their names. He saw who flinched when a certain man's shadow crossed the street. A week later, someone tried to rob the tailor. 3 boys, desperate, loud. Giuseppe didn't raise his voice, he just stepped forward, didn't even reach for a weapon. One of the boys laughed, until Giuseppe gripped his throat with that twisted hand. The boy dropped like a puppet cut from strings. Word traveled fast. By winter, they weren't calling him Giuseppe anymore. They were calling him the clutch hand. Not as a joke, not anymore. The first time Giuseppe killed a man in New York, it wasn't out of rage. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even personal. It was business. But before that night, before blood soaked into brick and the cold body of a man twitched its last on Baxter Street, there was quiet. A long stretch of it. Weeks where Giuseppe walked the Lower East Side like he belonged to it. He didn't rush into power. He let it show itself to him, like a dog testing a new master. In the mornings, he stitched shirts and jackets with that eerie precision. The tailor, an old man named Lupo with crooked glasses and a short temper, never said much, but he respected Giuseppe. The boy showed up on time, worked clean, didn't gossip. In that cramped back room, with the hum of machines and the smell of steam and cloth, Giuseppe learned something valuable. Power is patience. Every day he watched the streets from the cracked window behind the shop. Same people, same movements, same habits. The butcher's delivery boy who always took the alley. The widow who left her coin purse too close to the edge of her basket. The young punk who waited on corners, never buying, always watching. It didn't take long for him to spot the rackets. One by one, he marked them in his mind. There was Angelo Rizzo, who ran a dice den behind a grocery. He paid protection to the wrong people and got shaken down twice a month by kids who barely had hair on their chins. There was Michelle Big Chin Trezzi, who ran loan money to desperate immigrants, charging double and breaking fingers if the interest came late. And then there was Ignazio Sharp Eyes Carbone, a man with a quiet reputation, but one Giuseppe didn't like. Ignazio moved in silence, just like him, but his silence reeked of betrayal. He smiled too much for a man in this business. One evening, as a soft fog rolled in off the Hudson, Giuseppe sat on a stoop with a cigarette between his fingers, listening to two kids brag about a job they pulled near Mulberry. They were laughing too loud, too wild, no discipline. "Who ran the job?" Giuseppe asked, not looking up. The younger one, barely 17, bones showing through his coat, grinned and said, "Sharp Eyes gave us the go." Giuseppe didn't smile, didn't speak, just filed the name away. That night, after the tailor closed the shop, Giuseppe walked to the back alley near the docks, where the salt air mixed with coal smoke and rotting fish. He met Salvatore Greco, a butcher's son who owed Giuseppe 2 favors. Not money, favors. Morelli never asked for coin. He asked for quiet things. "Follow Sharp Eyes," Giuseppe said. "Don't get seen. Don't speak to him. Just watch. 1 week." Salvatore nodded once. That's all it took. 7 days later, Giuseppe knew everything. Where Ignazio lived, who he met, what he paid, and who he didn't pay. Turns out Sharp Eyes was double dealing. He was working both sides of Baxter Street, taking cuts from 2 rival gangs and passing off bad jobs to desperate kids. The kind of man who'd give a knife to a boy and tell him to rob a liquor store, knowing the owner kept a gun under the counter. Blood for distraction, distraction for profit. Giuseppe didn't like men like that. He waited until a Sunday night when Ignazio closed up his business early. Giuseppe followed him on foot, keeping 2 bodies behind. Silent steps. His coat flapped gently in the breeze and his shadow stretched long under the gas lamps. Near Grand Street, Ignazio ducked into a hallway behind a meat market, a little-used path to the back of a tenement. It was dark, and Giuseppe moved with precision. He reached him just as Ignazio fumbled with his key. "Giuseppe?" the man asked, voice startled, eyes flashing with false recognition. Giuseppe didn't answer. He just stepped into the light, and with that twisted, deformed hand, he reached out, not fast, not frantic, and grabbed Ignazio by the jaw. That claw could grip a man like a bear trap. It wasn't the strength, it was the angle. Once he locked onto you, he didn't let go. With his right hand, he pulled a narrow blade from his coat and slid it under the man's ribs. Not a scream, just a gasp. Then a long, wet silence. Ignazio fell against the brick wall, eyes wide. "You talk too much," Giuseppe whispered. "Now you'll sleep quiet." The next morning, the whole block buzzed. Sharp Eyes was gone. No one saw nothing. No one heard nothing. But they all looked at Giuseppe differently. Especially the boys who used to laugh too loud. They lowered their eyes now, moved out of his way. Not because they knew, no one could prove it, but because they felt it. That week, 3 men came to him for advice. Not bosses, not soldiers, just men looking for order. One said, "The Irish charge us 10% to keep our carts safe. You think that's fair?" Another asked, "What would you do if someone skipped town owing you?" Giuseppe listened, slow, careful, then gave short answers, measured. By the end of that month, those same men were calling him Don Morello, not as a joke, not even with fear, with respect. But power attracts attention, and attention brings problems. One cold afternoon, while he stitched buttons into a wool coat, the back door of the tailor shop creaked open. Giuseppe didn't look up. He heard the footsteps before he saw the boots, polished, hard soles, not laborers. 2 of them. They stopped beside him. One leaned in. "You Morello?" the man asked. His voice wasn't Italian, Irish maybe, Bronx accent. Giuseppe nodded, slow. Name's Detective Keegan. We've heard some things. Giuseppe kept stitching. I fix coats, he said. Keegan chuckled. You fix more than that. Word is you've been giving orders, setting up little favors. We don't like that. Still stitching, still calm. You don't like coats? Keegan's hand came down on the table, hard. Listen, cripple, you might scare those dumb dagos out there, but you don't scare me. One wrong step and I'll have you deported so fast you won't even have time to say goodbye. The word cripple lingered in the air like rot. Giuseppe didn't blink. He just looked up slowly, eyes dark, unmoved. Do you like steak, detective? He asked softly. Keegan froze, confused. Giuseppe nodded toward the corner. The butcher across the street, he owes me 3 favors. If you're hungry, I can have one ready for you. On the house. A pause. Keegan stared at him, long, searching. Then he straightened his coat, smirked, and walked out. After that day, no more detectives came knocking. But Giuseppe remembered the insult, cripple. That word would haunt other men later. By 1901, Giuseppe had taken a new room above a pawn shop. 2 windows, a proper desk, a door that locked. He wasn't rich yet, but he was feared, and that was better. The tailor shop still ran, but he spent less time there, more time organizing. He brought in his half-brothers from Sicily, Nicholas, Vincenzo, and Cairo. Trusted blood, hard workers, each one different. Nicholas was quiet, smart, good with numbers. Vincenzo liked knives a little too much. Ciro? He smiled too easily, but he could talk a priest into selling rosaries. They helped expand the crew. Not loud, not flashy, just methodical. They offered protection to shop owners, set up a courier system, money in envelopes passed by hand, never by mail. And they did something the other gangs didn't. They kept their promises. If you paid them, no one touched your store. No one scratched your wagon. If someone tried, they vanished. One by one, the other small gangs bent the knee. Some resisted and paid for it. Others aligned willingly. By the time 1902 rolled around, the newspapers whispered about the Black Hand, a rising Italian force in New York, tied to threats, extortion, and missing men. But they didn't have a name yet. Not a real one. That would change soon. It started with a fire. Late spring. A bakery burned down in Little Italy. Arson, they said. A rival gang trying to scare Giuseppe's crew off their turf. They didn't know who they were dealing with. That same week, Giuseppe called a meeting. Not loud, not public. Just 10 men in a basement, under an old church that reeked of candle wax and wine. He laid out a map, streets, names, corners, schedules. He didn't yell, didn't thump his chest. He spoke like a man teaching a trade. This city is wood, he said, soft, dry. It only takes one flame to control it, but only if you know where to burn. That night, 5 fires lit up the city. Not homes, not bakeries, rivals. 3 men died, 2 went missing. Giuseppe never touched a match, never left the room, but everyone knew who gave the order. The next day, shopkeepers opened early and nodded toward the street with a new kind of respect. The Irish didn't challenge him anymore. The police looked the other way. Some even took envelopes to help them look longer. And a legend began to form, not the kind built on speeches or crowds. The kind built in whispers, in back alleys, in the way men flinched when they saw a certain silhouette in the gaslight. They called him the clutch hand, still. But now they added something more. Dawn, and he was only getting started. By summer of 1902, the city had begun to rot in ways only Giuseppe Morello could smell. Not the kind of rot from garbage in the streets or the stink of the slaughterhouses. This was political rot, the kind that seeped through courthouse walls, leaked under police stations, and bled into city contracts. And it reeked of opportunity. Giuseppe sat in the back room of a cigar shop on Elizabeth Street. The door was locked. The windows shuttered. The smoke from 3 men's cigars curled like snakes toward the ceiling, slow and quiet. They weren't here to smoke. They were here to kneel. They just didn't know it yet. Across the table from Giuseppe sat Tommaso Petri, a man who used to run numbers for the Irish up on 96th, a man who thought he could expand south without asking. His shirt was clean, but sweat stained the collar. His hand trembled a little when he reached for his glass. "You know, I respect what you're doing," Tommaso said, trying to keep his voice calm. "You're a smart man, Morello, organized, precise. But I got my streets. My people." Giuseppe said nothing. He sat back in the chair like it belonged to him before he did. That left hand, curled and unmoving, rested on the table. Not a threat. Not yet. Tommaso looked at the hand, tried not to. Giuseppe finally spoke. "Tell me something, Tommaso." Tommaso nodded quickly. "Anything." Giuseppe's voice stayed flat, measured. "If I take your best man, your numbers, your corner stores, and leave you your name, do you still feel like a boss?" Silence. Tommaso's mouth opened, closed. He was calculating, trying to find a way to talk tough and live to see tomorrow. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "I came here to make peace." Giuseppe nodded slowly. "Good." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp, voice quiet. "Then show me." Tommaso blinked. "How?" Giuseppe tapped the table once with 2 fingers. "Give me your bookkeeper." The room shifted. The 2 men behind Giuseppe, Ciro and Vincenzo, didn't move, but the air changed, tense, electric. Tommaso looked like he'd been slapped. "Salvatore, he's my cousin." Giuseppe nodded again. "Then you'll miss him more. But I don't need cousins. I need men who don't steal." Tommaso looked up, surprised. "He's skimming." Giuseppe didn't answer. He didn't have to. Tommaso swallowed hard. His pride fought his instincts, but in the end, instinct won. "I'll send him by tomorrow," he muttered. Giuseppe gave a small smile. No teeth. "Good man." That was how it started. One by one, the other mini-bosses folded. They didn't come with hats in hand or fanfare. They came quiet. Some tried to make deals. Others tried to lie. Giuseppe only respected one thing: control. Not power for its own sake. Power with discipline. He built his empire like a carpenter builds a table, not by shouting at the wood, but by knowing exactly where to cut, where to sand, and where to drive the nail. By the end of that summer, the streets from Canal to 110th whispered only one name: Morello. But power doesn't rise in silence forever. Sooner or later, someone always screams. But someone came in the form of Don Vito Corsi, an old-school Sicilian from Brooklyn with a booming voice, too many sons and too little patience. Corsi ran his neighborhood like a church with guns, strict, proud, loud. He didn't respect Morello, called him crippled fingers with a big mouth. That was his first mistake. His second? Letting his sons move numbers into Harlem, turf Giuseppe had already claimed through silent deals and quiet violence. Corsi didn't ask. He didn't even send a bottle of wine to pretend like it was a mistake. He just moved in, like the boroughs still worked on old world fear. Giuseppe didn't respond for 3 weeks. 3 full weeks of silence. No warnings, no meetings, no threats. That was his way. Let the man feel safe before the floor vanishes beneath his feet. The night it happened, the moon was barely a sliver. Clouds hung low and thick like smoke. In a quiet stretch of East 106th Street, a small apartment building caught fire. 3rd floor, where Corsi's son Alessandro lived with his wife and 2 kids. The building didn't collapse. No one died. Not that night. But the message was clear. We know where you sleep. The next day, Giuseppe sat in his office sipping espresso, reading a newspaper article about the fire. Vincenzo walked in, slow and casual. Corsi sent word. He wants a sit-down. Giuseppe looked up. Where? Vincenzo shrugged. His bakery. Neutral ground, he says. Giuseppe smiled faintly. Nothing is neutral. The meeting happened 2 nights later. A back room behind Corsi's bakery smelled like flour and blood and old wine. Long table, cheap chairs. Corsi sat at the head like he was still in Sicily. Giuseppe arrived with Ciro and Nicholas. No guns visible, just calm men with calm eyes. Corsi stood, arms wide, fake smile. Ah, the famous clutch hand. I hear you're making quite a mess out there. Giuseppe didn't smile back. You're burning down buildings now? Corsi added, still grinning. Giuseppe shrugged slightly. Fire clears space. Sometimes you need space to grow. Corsi sat, chuckling. You've got balls, I'll give you that. There was silence for a moment. Then Giuseppe leaned in. You want peace, or you want noise? Corsi's grin faded. You think you can run this city? No, Giuseppe said. I am running it. Corsi leaned back, face hardening. You ain't got the bloodline. You ain't got the age. Giuseppe's eyes narrowed. I've got the men who count, the ones who move money, the ones who don't flinch, the ones who know a lion when they see one. Corsi banged the table with his fist. You're not a lion, you're a cripple. Cairo flinched. Vincenzo's eyes darkened. But Giuseppe just smiled, that same cold, teethless smile. He stood up, slow. I've heard that word before, he said. He placed his twisted hand on the table. And every man who said it ended up feeding the rats. He walked out. 3 days later, Don Vito Corsi's bakery exploded. Gas leak, the paper said. No one believed it. Don Vito survived, but barely. Lost 2 fingers, retired a week later, moved to Buffalo, never said a word again. That was the last time anyone called him cripple. From then on, they called him the boss of bosses. By winter, Giuseppe's reach touched every corner of Manhattan. He ran gambling, loans, smuggling, protection, all through layers of men who feared him more than they loved their own blood. But the thing that made him different, the thing that made him untouchable, wasn't just violence. It was how he organized it. He started writing everything down, not on paper. That could be taken. In a black book, coded, locked in a drawer that only Nicholas held the key to. Every loan, every debt, every favor owed, a ledger of loyalty. And if you owed him, you never forgot. Because he didn't forget, ever. But even kings have ghosts. And Giuseppe had one, a quiet specter from the old country. His half-brother Calogero, who stayed behind in Sicily. A man with ambition, a man who always believed Giuseppe stole the future meant for him. Word came by letter. No name, just a message. He's coming, and he doesn't kneel. Giuseppe read the note once, burned it, then he lit a cigarette, and waited. Calogero Morello arrived in New York under a false name, just like Giuseppe had all those years ago. But he didn't arrive quiet. He arrived with smoke in his lungs and a knife in his coat. The port paper said Salvatore Marino, but the man stepping off that freighter had Morello eyes, hard, deep set, with something behind them that didn't blink. He walked with a slow confidence, dressed better than the rest of the immigrants. Dark coat, polished boots, thin gloves hiding hands that had done more than farming. Calogero had been many things in Sicily, smuggler, enforcer, even a minor don in his province. But he had never been second to Giuseppe, not in his own mind. He was the older brother, the rightful heir to their father's blood. Yet it was Giuseppe who crossed the ocean, Giuseppe who made a name, Giuseppe who held New York by the throat with that deformed hand, that claw, that crooked grip. It haunted him. So Calogero came to take something back, not land, not money, respect. Giuseppe heard about his arrival 2 days before he stepped onto Manhattan streets. The news came from Vincenzo, who intercepted a wire between 2 dock hands. He read it twice, passed it to Giuseppe, and waited without speaking. Giuseppe didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply said, "Let him come." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his desk. The lights low, the street quiet outside his window. The sounds of the city muffled like someone whispering in the next room. A cup of black coffee sat, untouched, beside a half-burned candle. He thought of Sicily, of dust, of men with slow eyes and knives that never made noise. He thought of his mother, and he thought of the boy Calogero used to be. They were never close. Half-brothers, born of different mothers, raised in the same hard house but with separate hungers. Calogero had always been louder, angrier, The kind of boy who needed to be seen. Giuseppe, on the other hand, had been quiet, focused, sharp. One led with his mouth, the other with silence. And now, the louder one was coming to a city built on Giuseppe's silence. 3 days later, Calogero stepped into Mulberry Street like he owned it. He walked into a cafe at noon. Not a dark alley, not a back room. A public cafe, with people sitting at tables, sipping espresso, speaking Sicilian in low tones. He didn't sit in the corner or keep his coat closed. He let everyone see the silver ring on his finger, the one with the old crest, the Morello symbol. Within the hour, word reached Giuseppe. "Your brother's here," said Nicholas. Giuseppe looked up from his desk. "Where?" "Downtown. He's making himself known." Giuseppe stood, straightened his collar. "Send Ciro Morello, the talker, youngest of the brothers, but the most charming. A smile that could disarm a priest and a knife that came quicker than a heartbeat if needed." He went to the cafe with no guards, no weapons. Just a warm grin and a handshake. He found Calogero sipping coffee, reading a paper in Italian like he belonged there. Cairo smiled. "We don't get many Morellos on this side of the ocean." Calogero looked up, eyes slow to move like a man already bored. "Only need one." "Your brother might disagree." Calogero smiled faintly. "He always did like having the last word." Cairo took the seat across from him. "He wants to see you." Calogero raised an eyebrow. "He sent you to invite me?" "No," Cairo leaned in. "He sent me to make sure you understand something before you do." Calogero set the paper down. "And what's that?" "This isn't Sicily. You come into New York using a fake name, make noise in public, wear rings from the old country. People here don't respond to noise, they respond to results." Calogero nodded slowly. "And who gave you that speech, Giuseppe?" Ciro grinned. "No, that one's mine." For a moment, the two men just sat there, locked in a quiet standoff. The cafe around them carried on like nothing was happening. Spoons stirred, cups clinked, old men argued softly about football back home. Finally, Calogero pushed his cup forward. "Tell him I'll see him, but not in that little office above the pawn shop." Ciro's smile dropped a little. "Where then?" Calogero stood, adjusting his coat. "Tell him to come to me. I'll be at the hotel on Bowery, top floor." Ciro said nothing, just nodded once, then turned and walked out. Back at the office, Giuseppe heard the message. "Bowery?" he asked. "He wants me to walk into a hotel full of his men?" "He's trying to reverse the table," Nicholas muttered. "Make you come to him." Giuseppe looked out the window for a long while. The city moved below. Wagons, vendors, boys selling papers, women dragging laundry baskets across the street. Then he said, "Fine, let's reverse the table." That night, Calogero waited in his hotel suite. He had brought 3 men with him from Sicily, all killers, all loyal, all ready. They smoked and played cards in the next room, while Calogero stood by the window, watching the city breathe. He expected Giuseppe to arrive like a dawn, with guards, with tension, with caution. Instead, the door knocked twice. When it opened, there stood Giuseppe, alone, no hat, no coat, just a plain black suit and that damn curled hand. He walked in without being asked. Calogero stared. "No soldiers? No backup?" Giuseppe shrugged. "Your family." Calogero smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not the word I'd use." Giuseppe didn't sit. He looked around the room, slow. "This is a nice hotel." Calogero folded his arms. "I've done well." "You've done fast," Giuseppe corrected. There was silence between them, thick, heavy, the kind of silence only brothers can hold. "You built a kingdom here," Calogero said finally, "but you forgot where you came from." Giuseppe turned his eyes to him. "No. I just remembered that where we came from tried to kill us." Calogero chuckled. "You always were cold." "No," Giuseppe said. "I just never liked noise." Another silence. Calogero stepped forward. "You know why I'm here?" "Yes. I want what's mine." "You didn't build it." "It's still my name." Giuseppe tilted his head. "Is that what this is about? The name?" Calogero's voice dropped. "I lived in your shadow, watched you leave. Watched you rise, and no matter what I did over there, they always asked me about you. Giuseppe nodded slowly. Then you understand why I can't give you a piece. Calogero blinked. You won't share? Giuseppe's voice turned hard. You're not here to share, you're here to challenge. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. You think you'll sit in my chair, use my name, call my men. You're not here for respect. You're here for a throne. Calogero's hand twitched toward his coat. Giuseppe didn't move. You pull that gun, he said softly, and my men will burn this hotel to the ground before your body hits the floor. Calogero's jaw clenched. Giuseppe stepped back. I won't kill you, not yet, but you won't get another meeting. He turned to the door, and just before leaving, he said, enjoy your hotel, while it stands. 2 days later, one of Calogero's men went missing. Then another. Then the front desk clerk at the hotel turned up with a broken jaw and no memory. No one said a word, but Calogero heard the message. This wasn't Sicily. This was Giuseppe's city, and family meant nothing if you crossed him. The air in Little Italy changed after Calogero's arrival, not with fire or bodies, but with a feeling. People began to speak in hushed tones again, not because Giuseppe told them to, but because uncertainty had crept in. And nothing was more dangerous in the underworld than uncertainty. For years, Giuseppe Morello had ruled the city with calm consistency. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't advertise power, but men feared him the way they feared the ocean, slow, inevitable, unforgiving. Now, whispers of his half-brother began weaving through the streets. They say he killed 3 men in Palermo. They say he's here to take over. They say Giuseppe's lost control. No one dared say it to Giuseppe's face, but he heard everything. Inside the old apartment above the pawn shop, the office had changed. There was less silence, more tension. Nicholas kept reorganizing papers. Cairo stopped joking during meetings. Even Vincenzo, who never flinched at violence, sat a little straighter during dinner. Something had shifted, and it wasn't the city. It was Giuseppe. He was still calm, still quiet. But the stillness had changed. It wasn't patience anymore. It was pressure, the kind that builds behind closed doors, the kind that snaps bones when it finally moves. What are you going to do? Nicholas asked one night. Giuseppe didn't look up from the ledgers. Nicholas pressed again. Calogero's not just here for attention. He's been making calls, meeting with old crews. He even talked to the Gambinis. That name made the room go quiet. The Gambinis weren't Sicilian. They were Neapolitan, and until now, they'd respected the invisible lines between their world and Giuseppe's. But Calogero didn't care about lines. Giuseppe closed the book slowly, stood up, walked to the window. The city moved below, slower at night, but not asleep. He said, almost softly, let him gather, let him reach. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. You're going to let him build an army? Giuseppe turned. No, I'm going to let him think he's building one. Meanwhile, Calogero was doing exactly that. He knew his time was short. Giuseppe wasn't going to let him breathe forever, so he moved fast, faster than Giuseppe ever would. He started meeting with resentful captains, men who had been under Morello's thumb for too long, the ones who wanted louder victories, not silent security. He made promises, more profit, less rules, faster rewards. He gave them hope, and hope in the criminal world is just another kind of poison. Calogero met with Antonio Ricci, a loan shark who'd grown tired of Giuseppe's limits. He met with Sal Martelli, a former enforcer who'd been sidelined for his drinking. He even approached Enzo De Luca, a bitter man who'd once been Tiro's rival for control over the numbers racket. One by one, he whispered in their ears. Not about overthrowing Giuseppe, just about changing the structure. More opportunity, he said, more movement, a chance to breathe. It was never treason, not out loud, but everyone heard the undertone. Giuseppe's reign is quiet, but maybe it's time for something louder. Then came the first real fracture. It happened on a Thursday. A small-time collector named Lorenzo Spada was supposed to deliver a cash envelope from a gambling house on 118th, standard route. No risk, he never made it. Instead, he walked straight into a warehouse near the river. a location owned quietly by Calogero. He dropped the envelope without a word. When news reached Cairo, he stormed into the office, tossing a torn scrap of paper on Giuseppe's desk. "He's poaching our roots now." Giuseppe read the note. Nothing on it but a name and a number, but that was enough. "Lorenzo used to shine my shoes," Ciro growled. "Now he won't even look me in the eye." Giuseppe didn't speak. Nicholas stepped in. "You need to respond." Still silence. Finally, Giuseppe said, "Get Lorenzo." Nicholas nodded, already reaching for his coat. Giuseppe raised a finger. Alive. Lorenzo was found that night sitting at a dice table, laughing too loud. Ciro dragged him through the back alley of the club, hands bound, mouth gagged. They threw him into the office like a sack of grain. Giuseppe didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply pulled a chair up, sat across from him, and looked him in the eyes. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. Lorenzo, shaking, nodded. "Because you forgot something," Giuseppe said softly. Lorenzo blinked. What? "You forgot who fed your mother when your father died. You forgot who gave you your first job. You forgot who protected your sister when that drunk tried to drag her behind a bar." Tears welled in the boy's eyes. "I didn't mean to," Giuseppe raised a hand. "You thought I'd be too soft to notice. Too slow to react." He leaned forward, voice low. "You forgot what I am." Then, slowly, Giuseppe took out a coin. A heavy, old Italian coin. The kind that wasn't worth much anymore. He placed it in Lorenzo's palm. "You live, but you don't eat at my table anymore." And just like that, the boy was cast out. No knife, no bullet. But in the streets, that was worse. Death was quick. Exile was forever. Calogero heard about it within the hour. He smiled. Giuseppe was getting personal. That meant he was bleeding. And so, Calogero struck harder. The next week, 2 of Giuseppe's runners went missing. One turned up dead in a meat locker. The other vanished completely. No bodies, no notes, just a gap. Nicholas panicked. "He's testing how far he can push." Giuseppe nodded. "Then let's give him the illusion of progress." Ciro looked up. "What are you thinking?" Giuseppe stood slowly, walked to the drawer behind his desk, pulled out a single photograph, an old one, yellowed, from Sicily. 4 boys standing in a dusty street. One of them was Giuseppe. One was Calogero. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "It's time we remind the city who built this." That weekend, a wedding was held in the Bronx, the son of an old associate getting married in a church that smelled of incense and sawdust. Most of the neighborhood's faces were invited, but Calogero wasn't. Not officially. He came anyway. And he came in style. Black coat, gold cufflinks, 2 new enforcers from the docks behind him. He walked in during the reception, loud and smiling, hugging people who barely knew him. The tension was immediate. At the front table, Giuseppe sat with Nicholas Cairo and 3 top earners. He saw Calogero the moment he walked in, didn't move, didn't even react. Calogero swaggered up, arms open. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" he said, grinning. Giuseppe looked at him. "Unexpected." Calogero leaned in close, just enough for only Giuseppe to hear. "You going to stop me in front of all these nice people? Or are you going to pretend you still control this city?" Giuseppe took a slow sip of wine, then stood. The music stopped. Conversations paused. Giuseppe turned to the crowd and said in a calm, almost amused tone, "Ladies and gentlemen, my brother." Everyone looked at Calogero, and then Giuseppe smiled, a full smile, rare and chilling. Some people come to weddings to celebrate, others come to be seen. Either way, let's raise a glass. And he raised his glass. Everyone followed. Calogero didn't. He just stood there, smirking, humiliated in silence. Later that night, his enforcers would try to rough up one of Giuseppe's men outside the church. They'd be found in a dumpster the next morning, still breathing, but barely. Message delivered. The war wasn't declared yet, but it had begun. Not with guns, not with headlines, but with looks, moves, and silences that made men sweat. Giuseppe didn't need to say it out loud. The city would not be shared. The first real shot was fired on a wet Thursday. It wasn't meant to be a statement, but that's exactly what it became. Salvatore Sal Conti, one of Giuseppe's oldest earners, a steady man, never flashy, was walking home from his corner office just after dusk. Rain tapped softly against the brim of his hat. He was humming a lullaby his mother used to sing. 2 blocks from his apartment, a boy ran past. Then a second figure emerged from the shadows, 3 gunshots. By the time Sal hit the sidewalk, the city had already turned away. When Ciro found out, he smashed a chair against the wall. "That was our man," he said, pacing the office. "He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hitter. He was quiet, loyal." Nicholas nodded grimly. "That's why they picked him." Giuseppe sat perfectly still behind his desk, eyes half-lidded. He didn't react. He never did right away. His rage came slow, measured, like water, finding the lowest place to drown you. "Who was it?" he asked. Cairo swallowed his fury and exhaled. "Could have been DeLuca's crew. Or maybe Calagiro's new boys from Jersey." "No," Giuseppe shook his head. "Calogero wouldn't risk outsiders yet. That wasn't about territory." He tapped the desk softly with his fingers. "That was about sending a message, letting us know there are no safe pieces anymore." Nicholas frowned. "What do we do?" Giuseppe leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if looking through it. "We reply." The next 24 hours were quiet. Too quiet. No retaliation, no meetings, no movement from Morello's crew. People expected something loud. But Giuseppe didn't believe in loud. He believed in surgical silence. While Calogero puffed up his chest and strutted around Union Square, while his men toasted Sal's death in half-lit clubs, Giuseppe was moving pieces they hadn't even noticed were on the board. One of those pieces was Matteo, the Whisper Bruno, a locksmith by trade and infiltrator by habit. The kind of man who could slip into a guarded room and leave without the doorknob turning. He didn't kill. He didn't threaten. He simply got inside. Giuseppe called him in. "Find me their cracks," he said. Matteo nodded. "How deep?" Giuseppe stared at him for a moment. "Burial deep." 3 nights later, the storm came. Not a weather storm, a Morello storm. It started in Harlem just before midnight. A gambling house tied to Calogero was burned to the ground. No one inside made it out. 5 minutes later, a truck owned by DeLuca's crew exploded on 12th Street, taking 3 of his men with it. 20 minutes after that, a butcher shop that had been laundering money for Calagero's Bronx operation was hit by 2 masked men with sawed-off shotguns. In less than an hour, 9 men were dead, 3 buildings gone, and half the city's street runners had switched allegiance back to Giuseppe without needing to be asked, because now they remembered what the clutch hand meant. He didn't squeeze often, but when he did, things broke. The next morning, the city buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Police blamed Irish mobs. Papers called it a gangland flare-up. And Calogero went into a rage. He flipped a table in his Bowery hotel suite, slapped one of his men in the face, screamed at the ceiling. "They think I'm weak," he shouted. "He thinks he can kill my men and just walk the street like nothing happened." His consigliere, a gaunt man named Paolo who'd followed him from Palermo, tried to calm him. "You struck first. He's only answering." "I struck small," Calogero spat. "He made it a war." Paolo leaned in. "Then end it." Calogero paused. "How?" "Take his heart." That night a plan was drawn. Ciro Morello. He was young, a talker, always moving around. Not as protected as Giuseppe, not as hidden as Nicholas. He would bleed easiest. Giuseppe knew something was coming. Ciro hadn't been home in 2 nights, working late, running collections, checking up on vulnerable territories. He had that restless energy, the kind Giuseppe worried about. "Send a shadow on him," he told Nicholas. "Someone quiet." They picked Emilio Vargas, an ex-boxer turned body man who owed Giuseppe his life. That choice would save Ciro's. On the 3rd night, Ciro was leaving a speakeasy in Hell's Kitchen. He'd just settled a dispute between 2 bookmakers. Quick, clean, no blood. He was in good spirits. He never saw the car. It pulled up smooth. No screech, no warning. The back window rolled down. 2 barrels poked out. Then the world went red. But just before the trigger pulled, Emilio threw himself into the shot. He took the first 2 slugs in the chest, spinning backward into the gutter. Ciro dove behind a trash bin as the car lit up the alley. When it peeled off, tires screaming, Emilio lay groaning, eyes fading. Ciro crawled to him, hands shaking. "Stay with me," he whispered. Emilio looked up. "You owe me a drink," he muttered, then coughed blood. He died 10 seconds later. When Giuseppe saw the body, he didn't speak for a full minute. Ciro stood beside him, clothes soaked, jaw clenched. Giuseppe finally turned to Nicholas. "I want one of Caloggero's men, not a pawn, not a foot soldier." Nicholas nodded. "Who?" Giuseppe's voice was ice. "Paolo." Paolo was cautious. He didn't travel alone. He moved locations often, but even careful men sleep, and even careful men need comfort. A girl tipped them off, a cigarette girl at a jazz bar who'd once watched Paolo break a busboy's wrist for overcooking steak. She didn't want money. She wanted revenge. "He always leaves through the alley," she said. "He parks the car there." Giuseppe didn't send soldiers. He sent Vincenzo, and Vincenzo didn't knock. It was fast. Paolo stepped into the alley at 2:17 a.m., lighting a cigarette, loosening his tie. Vincenzo came from behind, gloved hands, no hesitation. A knife, clean across the throat, no sound, no time to pray. The body was left on the hood of Caloggero's car, eyes open, mouth stuffed with a playing card. The king of spades. That was the night the streets went full black. Shops closed early, gamblers stayed home, even crooked cops kept their heads down. Giuseppe had never started this war, but now he was going to finish it. For 3 days after Paolo's body turned up on the hood of Caloggero's car, New York City held its breath. Not a single retaliatory move. Not a word from Caloggero's crew. Not even whispers in the bars. But the stillness wasn't calm. It was charged. Every man on the street had that same look in his eyes, like he was walking under a sky made of glass. They knew something was coming, something big. No one dared say it out loud, but they all felt it. Even Giuseppe. He'd taken a corner seat in the back of the old butcher's shop on Grand, where meat hooks still swung empty in the ceiling. It wasn't a war room, but he liked the cold, the smell of blood in the walls. It reminded him of what the city was now, carved, hung, and waiting. Nicholas stood near the window, arms folded. "Nothing yet," he said. "Not a move. Not a whisper." Giuseppe nodded. He's not thinking anymore. Ichiro, still bandaged from the alley attack, was seated nearby, sipping hot espresso. "He's hurting." Giuseppe looked at his younger brother. "No," he said. "He's unraveling." Meanwhile, Calogero sat alone in a hotel room that no longer felt like power. The carpets were stained with ash and blood from Paolo's last steps. The windows were sealed tight, and the whiskey on the table had gone untouched for hours. He hadn't slept in 2 days, not because of fear, but because of rage. "Giuseppe," he muttered to himself, eyes bloodshot. "That son of a bitch." Paolo had been more than a consigliere. He'd been his shadow, his cleaner, the only man who dared talk him down when he got too loud. Now he was gone. His men were scattered, paranoid, second-guessing every corner. Even the Gambinis, who had once flirted with supporting him, stopped answering telegrams. Every hour, Calogero felt the grip loosen, not Giuseppe's, his own. That night, Calogero held a meeting. 10 men in a darkened dining hall on the east side, 2 tables pushed together, food untouched, voices low. He stood at the head, eyes scanning the faces. "You think I've lost it?" he asked. "Is that what this is?" No one answered. "Paolo was worth 10 of Giuseppe's rats," he spat. "He sent a message, but I'm going to send a goddamn letter." Still silence. Then Antonio Ricci, the loan shark who'd backed Calogero early, cleared his throat. "Giuseppe has structure, a network. You came in loud, Cal. You made a lot of noise. That worked in Sicily, not here." Calogero's eyes narrowed. "You saying I can't run this city?" Ricci didn't flinch. "I'm saying you didn't build it." It was a simple sentence, but in that room, it dropped like thunder. Calogero stepped forward. You think I care about who built what? Ricci kept his eyes locked. You should, because you're standing in someone else's house, acting like you own the bricks. The table tensed. Calogro's hand hovered near his belt. Watch yourself, Antonio. But Ricci didn't back down. You already lost. You just haven't bled enough to feel it. The next morning, Ricci's body was found in a dry well outside the Bronx. 2 bullets in the back, his wallet still in his pocket. Message sent. But the message wasn't power. It was panic. Back in Morello's office, Giuseppe laid out a new map. Not of streets, of names. He circled Ricci's name in red. He was the last man with spine on Calogro's side, Nicholas said. Giuseppe nodded. Then he's alone now. Ciro leaned in. We strike? Giuseppe stared at the map a long time before speaking. No, let him rot. What do you mean? He's already lost the war, but he won't accept it until we take the one thing he still believes he has. Cairo tilted his head. Which is? Giuseppe's voice dropped. Fear. So they stopped fighting. No more fires, no more shootings, no more retribution. And the silence that followed was far more terrifying than bullets. Calogro's men grew restless. Some stopped showing up to meetings. Others started making side deals behind his back. Without constant blood, they started remembering how safe the city felt under Giuseppe's hand. One by one, they vanished. Not murdered, not even threatened. They just disappeared. Folded back into the streets, into Giuseppe's web. By the end of the week, Calogro's crew was down to 4 loyal men. Men who followed out of loyalty, not logic. And loyalty, as Calogro would learn, isn't bulletproof. That Friday, Giuseppe walked alone into Benevento's, an old restaurant near Canal Street. He didn't bring guards, didn't carry a weapon. He just sat at his usual corner table and ordered the roast lamb. The owner, old Donato Benevento, approached nervously. Should we close the doors, Don Giuseppe? Giuseppe shook his head. No, let them see. So they saw. The king in plain view, untouched, unmoved, unchallenged, and across town in a dark hotel suite, Calogro smashed a mirror with his bare hand. But it was what came next that truly broke him, the final move. The message that would end the war without a single shot. It came in the form of a letter, handwritten in Sicilian dialect, addressed to Calogro's real name. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single phrase, "Go home, or die where no one will remember your name." Attached was a single object, a rusted nail, bent, with a piece of ribbon wrapped around it, a symbol used in the old country when a family excommunicated one of its own. Calogro stared at it for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't move. The war had ended, and he'd lost. Not to fire, not to gunmen, to silence, to structure, to Giuseppe. 3 nights later, under the cover of rain, Calogro boarded a ship headed back to Sicily. He didn't say goodbye, didn't send a final threat. He just left, because he finally understood. You don't challenge a man who builds empires in whispers. You don't fight a hand that never lets go. And you don't step into a city that already belongs to someone else. Giuseppe stood on a rooftop that morning, watching the ship disappear into the fog. Cairo approached behind him. He's gone? Giuseppe nodded. Nicholas stepped beside them. No one else will try this again for a long time. Giuseppe didn't smile. He simply lit a cigarette, watched the smoke rise, and said, "Now, we clean the blood." The city didn't cheer when the war ended. There were no fireworks, no headlines, but everyone knew. The way dogs barked less. The way shopkeepers left their signs out longer. The way mothers let their children walk home alone again. Giuseppe Morello hadn't just won. He had outlived his enemies, outthought them, outweighted them, and now New York, or at least the parts that mattered, was back under his full control. From the banks in Harlem to the alley clubs in Brooklyn, everyone knew the new rule. The clutch hand was the only hand that fed, protected, and punished. But peace was never still in the Morello world, not truly. It was a period of rebuilding and rebalancing. The war with Calogro had left cracks. cracks that Giuseppe could feel in the bones of the street, even if no one spoke them out loud. Some men were gone, some had switched sides, others had kept their heads down long enough that Giuseppe had to wonder where their loyalties truly landed. So he did what he always did. He listened, not with his ears, with movements, gestures, pauses in conversations. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't need proof, he needed rhythm. And when someone's rhythm changed, Giuseppe noticed. He called a private meeting with his brothers in a quiet room above a tailor shop, not the old shop from years ago, but a new one owned by a widow whose husband Giuseppe had once spared. She didn't ask questions, she just left the door unlocked. Inside, the walls were bare. A single table, 3 chairs, no wine, no food, just business. Nicholas was first to speak. "We need to fill the holes. Sal's gone. Ricci's dead. Emilio's gone. We're spread too thin." Ciro, still nursing bruised ribs, added, "And the neighborhoods in Queens are asking questions. They're waiting for us to assign new captains." Giuseppe sat quietly, looking at a city map tacked to the wall. He traced the streets with his eyes, not his fingers, like a man reading scripture. Finally, he spoke. "We don't just fill holes, we don't just replace the dead." Nicholas frowned. "Then what do we do?" Giuseppe stood slowly. "We evolve." The first step in his evolution was subtle. He promoted no one. Instead of replacing captains immediately, he folded their roots into trusted hands, testing who could carry more without being corrupted. To a street soldier, this looked like a reward, but to Giuseppe, it was a test of weight. "Give a man a crown too soon," he said, "and he'll drown in it." Ciro asked, "What if someone breaks?" Giuseppe answered simply, "Then we know who to bury next." In the months that followed, order returned like winter fog, slow, inevitable. The debt collections ran smooth. The gambling houses reopened, quieter this time. The police, as always, were easy to keep on retainer. But Giuseppe focused his attention on something most bosses ignored: the docks. The war had distracted other crews from the shipments. Cargo had been left unattended, underprotected, undervalued. The Irish had stopped watching the water. The Jewish outfits were in transition. Even the corrupt dock inspectors were behind on their bribes. Giuseppe saw a void, and he moved like water. He sent Nicholas to South Street Seaport, where Sicilian fishermen had built quiet influence for years. They weren't soldiers, they were working men. But Giuseppe didn't need killers, he needed access. "Help them," he told Nicholas. "Fix their licenses, pay their debts, protect their families." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Giuseppe's answer was cold and calculated. "For 3 things: dock space, night entry, and silence." By summer, Morello controlled the flow of 40% of the illegal shipments into lower Manhattan, including liquor, guns, women, and tobacco. Nothing moved without a tax, and no one questioned the tax. Because with the war over, people remembered something simple. Giuseppe didn't need to be feared to be obeyed. He needed to be remembered. But not everyone remembered the right way. One night, a young street boss named Bruno Vescari decided to skim. Not much, just a few envelopes from the gambling house in Harlem. But enough. Nicholas caught it first. Running the books late at night by candlelight, Giuseppe didn't react when told. He just said, "Let him dig his hole." 3 weeks passed. Vescari got bolder. He started bragging in bars that the old man wasn't watching anymore. "He's too comfortable," he told a dancer on the west side. "He ain't got the fire left." Word reached Ciro. Giuseppe's answer? "Bring him in." The meeting took place in a room behind a church where confessions used to be heard. Vescari arrived with his chin high, his suit sharp. Giuseppe was already seated, a worn book open on the table. He didn't look up. "Sit," he said. Vescari chuckled. "You still running numbers by hand, old man?" No answer, just the turn of a page. Finally, Giuseppe looked up. His voice was calm. "You took from me," Vescari shrugged. "A few bills. You lied to me. Everyone lies. You taught us that." Giuseppe closed the book. "You forgot one thing." What's that? He tapped his chest lightly. Once. I remember everything. Then, from behind the curtain, two men stepped out. One carried a baseball bat, the other a canvas bag. Giuseppe stood and left the room before the first blow landed. When he returned 20 minutes later, Viscari was gone. No one ever saw him again. The streets knew what that meant. With the blood cleaned and the books balanced, Giuseppe did something he hadn't done in years. He went home early, not to the pawn shop, not to the clubs, home, to a small brownstone in the West Village that no one knew belonged to him. A woman opened the door. Dark-haired, older now, but still with the sharp cheekbones and kind eyes that once made Giuseppe linger at a Sicilian bakery long after his bread had been bad. Her name was Lucia. She wasn't his wife, but she was something more dangerous. She was the only person who had seen him cry. "Come in," she said softly. He stepped inside, removing his coat slowly, like a man coming in from war. "How was the city?" she asked. Giuseppe didn't answer for a moment. Then, quieter. She poured 2 glasses of red wine. No toast, no speeches. They sat in silence, the way they always had. Lucia finally broke it. "Are you tired?" Giuseppe stared at the glass. "Not yet." She reached across the table, gently touched the twisted fingers of his left hand. "You will be." That night, for the first time in months, Giuseppe slept through without waking. No knocks at the door, no gunshots in alleys, no telegrams about dead men in gutters, just sleep. And even in sleep, his hand stayed clenched. By the end of the year, there were no challengers left. The Black Hand wasn't just a name in whispers anymore. It was in ledgers, in politics, in port authorities. Giuseppe Morello became the first man to turn chaos into currency. Not by flooding the streets with blood, but by building a system where everyone owed something, and no one escaped the book. And yet, despite all the power, he kept one thing close: his silence. Because the louder you are, the easier you are to find. And Giuseppe? He'd survived it all, the old country, the war with Calogero, the traitors, the losses, all by keeping quiet and clenching that twisted hand until the world bent to its shape. The year was 1908, and for the first time since Giuseppe Morello set foot in New York, it wasn't the gangs that were hunting him. It was Washington. It started slow, the way all real threats begin. Not with a raid, not with a shootout, but with a letter. A simple envelope dropped on the desk of Detective William Flynn, Bureau of Investigation. Inside, one sentence. They call him the Clutch Hand. He's the one who owns the city, and no one touches him. No signature, no return address, just a challenge. Flynn, a hard man with cold eyes and a hatred for syndicates, read the line twice. Then he stood up, grabbed his coat, and began his war. Not with a gun, but with a case file. Giuseppe had grown careful. The war with Calogero had taught him more than how to crush a rival. It had reminded him that nothing stays buried. Not even the quiet kind of power. Especially not that kind. That's why, when he noticed the new faces loitering near the docks, he didn't panic. He adjusted. He shifted the books to code. He moved his cash houses every 4 days. He stopped writing letters, even to his brothers. Everything moved through whispers again, back to the old way. But the Bureau didn't need whispers. They needed paper. And in the end, it wasn't a traitor that threatened Giuseppe. It was money. The Black Hand had long been a whisper, an idea, more than a structure. Letters with threats, names without faces, men who came and went like fog. But Giuseppe changed that. He brought structure to chaos. He turned fear into a business. Protection, gambling, smuggling, loan sharking, all tightly run, all recorded in a coded ledger kept under lock and key. A no violence unless necessary. No noise unless it sent a message. But even tight systems leak. And in early spring, a low-level runner named Aldo Spinetti got caught in a sting. Drunk, sloppy, boasting about collections he didn't understand. He mentioned names, routes, drop points. He mentioned a building on Houston Street, a safe house, a minor one, but one with papers. On April 17, 1908, federal agents kicked the door in. Giuseppe wasn't there. Neither were any of the captains. But the agents didn't need bodies. They found a desk, a drawer, and inside that drawer, a second, smaller ledger. Not the main book, but enough. Names, numbers, percentages, and in the margins, a note written in code. Ask Pietro about the new wine barrels. Joseph signs off. They didn't know who Pietro was, but they guessed who Joseph might be. Giuseppe. Giuseppe was sitting in his office when the news arrived. Nicholas delivered it. They hit Houston Street. Giuseppe closed his eyes for a full 5 seconds. Anyone taken? No, but they took documents. Giuseppe stood slowly. We'll burn the rest. For the next 2 weeks, Morello men lit fires. Not buildings, files, backrooms emptied, ledgers erased, contacts relocated. Giuseppe didn't yell, he didn't panic, he worked. Like a man tightening a belt around his own chest to survive the winter. But in Washington, Flynn was building, not with fire, with facts. The minor ledger was enough to justify surveillance. So they watched. Flynn's men followed the bakery on Canal, the florist on 14th, the quiet warehouse near the East River. They didn't raid. They waited. Just like Giuseppe had always done. Giuseppe noticed it. Of course he did. One of Flynn's men trailed a courier too closely near a deli. The courier made a turn, backtracked, saw the same man loitering with a newspaper too dry for a rainy day. Giuseppe had the name within the hour. Agent Keeler, Nicholas told him. Federal. Giuseppe poured a glass of grappa, took a sip, and said quietly, Then they're closer than we thought. But Giuseppe wasn't a street boss anymore. He couldn't threaten a federal man with a knife in an alley. That world was gone. Now he was fighting people who wore badges and had nothing to lose. So he turned to a different kind of weapon. Politics. Giuseppe had never trusted politicians. But he'd kept them fed. Small envelopes, holiday donations, quiet funding for neighborhood revitalization. Now he called in the chips. Assemblyman Thomas Radcliffe, a bloated man who owed his last 3 re-elections to Italian support, was invited to a private dinner in the back of a wine shop. The room was lit with a single oil lamp. Giuseppe didn't smile. He didn't eat. He simply said, They're looking at me. I need you to make sure they look at someone else. Radcliffe chuckled. You think I can stop the Bureau? Giuseppe stared at him without blinking. No, but I think you can flood them with other names. Radcliffe sobered. You mean feed them fake leads? I mean feed them the truth about other men who are louder, sloppier, greedier. Giuseppe leaned forward. I've run this city with discipline. I don't kill for fun. I don't sell to children. I don't move poison. But they're still coming for me because I did it quietly. He slid a small folder across the table. Inside, 5 names. Rivals, enemies, some fake, most real. You want peace in your district? Giuseppe said. Then let the fire burn somewhere else. Radcliffe looked at the folder, then nodded. A week later, the Bureau turned its attention to Gennaro Salvi, a Neapolitan smuggler who'd gotten too loud, too public. His arrest made headlines. Giuseppe's name disappeared, at least for now. But Flynn wasn't stupid. He knew the smoke was being redirected. He just couldn't prove it. He needed something bigger, something close, something inside. So he turned to the oldest play in the book, Flip a Soldier. The mistake came from Cairo. It wasn't betrayal, it was emotional weakness. He'd started seeing a girl named Lena, a seamstress with red hair and a smile that made him forget he wore a gun. He told her too much. She told her brother. Her brother told a cop. The cop told Flynn. And just like that, the Bureau had an opening. Flynn didn't approach Hero with a warrant. He approached him in church. Ciro had lit a candle for Emilio, the bodyguard who died saving his life. Flynn slid into the pew beside him, wearing plain clothes, hands folded. You're hard to catch alone, he said. Ciro didn't turn. Flynn kept talking. You ever wonder how long you'll last? A man like you, smart, quick, but tied to a man who's becoming a legend the wrong way. Still silence. I'm not asking you to betray him, Flynn said. I'm asking you to survive. Now Cairo turned. Survive what? Flynn stood, dropped a card in Ciro's lap. Think about it. Then walked out. That night, Ciro didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid of the Bureau, but because for the first time, he wondered if Giuseppe would sacrifice him if it came to it. And in his heart, he knew the answer. But Ciro was blood. He wouldn't flip. So Flynn tried someone else, and found Vittorio Mancini, a mid-level accountant who handled the dock payments and had a gambling problem no one knew about. Flynn caught him with $6,000 in debt to a rigged casino. It didn't take much. By the end of May, Mancini was a mole, and the Bureau had their first real lead. There's a ledger in a warehouse on Water Street, not the main book, but enough to hang 5 men. Flynn prepared a sealed raid. No press, no leaks, just 10 federal men, midnight rifles ready. They hit the warehouse fast, broke the lock, moved in, but it was empty. No books, no crates, no one, just a single folded note on the floor, written in red ink. Try again. The leak had been caught. Mancini vanished the next day. His body was never found, but his hand, his right hand, was mailed to the Bureau wrapped in newspaper. Flynn looked at it, then whispered to himself, "He's playing me." Giuseppe sat alone the next night, glass of wine untouched. Nicholas entered. "Flynn won't stop," Giuseppe nodded. Ciro stood by the door, silent. "What do we do?" Nicholas asked. Giuseppe looked at them both. "We finish building the wall." Giuseppe stood at the window of his West Village brownstone, untouched wine in hand, and stared at the street lamp flickering below. There was a time when he could smell danger coming, in the nervous chatter of his men, in the tension between corners, in the silence between gunshots. But this danger, this kind didn't carry pistols or blades. It carried badges, briefcases, evidence, and it was getting closer. 3 weeks after the failed Water Street raid, the Bureau turned inward. Flynn wasn't just angry, he was embarrassed. The press hadn't gotten wind of the failure, but whispers were enough to bruise his pride. He'd thought he was smarter than Morello. He was wrong. But Flynn had one thing Giuseppe didn't: time. Flynn started digging deeper, not at the top, but at the roots. He pulled employment logs from warehouses, customs forms from the port, shipment papers from docks that hadn't seen proper oversight in months, and what he found was a pattern. Morello's empire was built on rhythm, not chaos, not random violence, but a system, and all systems left tracks. "Everything is spaced," Flynn told his men one morning. "Routes, pickups, drop-offs, each 2 days apart, each with a buffer zone." One of his agents, Keeler, frowned. "But there's no ledger anymore." "There doesn't need to be," Flynn replied. "He built it into the routine. We follow the rhythm long enough, we find the heartbeat." And so the Bureau stopped chasing leads. They started chasing the calendar. Back in Manhattan, Giuseppe moved cautiously. He hadn't held a gun in weeks. He didn't need to. He had order. But he also had one problem: Ciro. His youngest brother was starting to crack. The girl, Lena, had become a distraction. He spent more time with her than with his crew. He missed meetings. He drank more. And worst of all, he'd started talking too much. Giuseppe confronted him one night at the old butcher shop office. "You're losing your edge," he said plainly. Ciro, leaning against the wall, laughed. "I'm alive, aren't I?" "You're noisy. I've earned that." Giuseppe walked slowly to him, expression still calm. "You earned silence, same as me, same as Nicholas, and now you're pissing it away over a woman." Ciro stiffened. "She's not just some skirt, Gio." Giuseppe didn't blink. "That's what Emilio said about the girl who got him killed." Ciro's jaw tightened. "You're comparing her to a rat?" "I'm comparing you to a man who forgot the weight of our name." The room fell quiet. Then Ciro exhaled, shook his head, and left. Giuseppe watched the door long after it shut. Meanwhile, Flynn's web tightened. 3 shipments intercepted, 2 runners arrested, both loyal, both silent. But one small crack came from an unlikely place. A warehouse foreman, a man named Clinton Yeager, mid-50s, 3 kids, 1 wife with cancer, and a dock boss too proud to ask for help. When the Bureau leaned on him with threats of tax fraud and jail time, he didn't break. But when they offered hospital bills covered, he caved. And Yeager gave them the name of a buyer, Enzo Scapelli, a middleman who'd been running untaxed liquor from Long Island to the Lower East Side under Morello's network. One weak link in a long chain. But it was enough. Flynn moved fast. He didn't arrest Enzo. He tailed him. For 3 weeks, federal men rotated shadows on him like clockwork, waiting for him to lead them to something bigger. And on the 17th day, they got lucky. Enzo pulled into a warehouse near Brooklyn Bridge and entered with a black briefcase. When he left an hour later, it was lighter. The agents moved in. Inside, they found no drugs, no guns, but they found a vault, locked tight, and a desk drawer full of coded notes, receipts, initials, pay percentages, dates. Flynn read them like a priest reading confession. He didn't smile. He just said, "This is the rope. Now we find the neck." Back at Morello's headquarters, Nicholas sensed something. "We're being circled again," he said, flipping through his own notes. "Same movement pattern, different faces." Giuseppe nodded. "They're building. You want to burn it down?" Giuseppe stood. "No, we bury it." That night, a fire tore through a small storefront on Delancey, a tailor shop, nothing valuable inside. But in the basement, 2 boxes of duplicate ledgers. Not the real ones, just enough to create confusion. It was Giuseppe's favorite tactic: flood the street with smoke. Let the bureau chase the wrong scent. Flynn was smart, but smart men hated doubt, and Giuseppe thrived in doubt. But the cracks were forming, not outside the family, but within it. Ciro, once loyal and clean, had begun slipping further. He started keeping his own books, small ledgers for his cut of side operations. A dangerous thing in a family built on centralized control. He thought Giuseppe wouldn't notice. He was wrong. One night, Nicholas dropped a worn leather book onto Giuseppe's desk, found behind a liquor shipment. Ciro's initials on every page. Giuseppe flipped through it in silence, then closed the book. He didn't call Cairo in, not right away. He waited 3 days, let the betrayal settle in his blood. And when Ciro finally showed up, drunk and grinning, Giuseppe didn't say a word. He just looked at him for a long, heavy minute, then said, "You're either with me or you're trying to be me." Ciro's smile faded. "Gio, I wasn't. I've seen the book." Ciro froze. Giuseppe stood, slowly, deliberately. "You think this is still a street crew? You think you can carve your own path inside my city?" "I wasn't stealing. You were building. That's worse." Ciro's face twisted with frustration. "You think this life belongs to just you? I bled for this family. I almost died for you." Giuseppe stepped forward, "And I would have buried 10 of you to keep the name clean." Silence. Then Giuseppe turned his back. "Leave. You're throwing me out?" "No, I'm giving you a choice." Ciro stood there for a long time, then left. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just gone. Nicholas found him 2 days later, in Jersey, drinking with small-time crooks. Not enemies, but not friends either. Giuseppe didn't order a hit. He didn't call for a sit-down. He said one thing: let him rot. Sometimes exile is louder than execution. Meanwhile, Flynn had built his case. The coded receipts, the foreman's testimony, a connection to bank transfers in Staten Island, all leading back to Giuseppe's financial shell companies. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was enough to indict 4 men in his circle, enough to scare judges, make headlines, rattle bones. Flynn stood in front of the press and said, "This is the beginning of the end. The clutch hand is losing his grip." Giuseppe watched it all in silence. He didn't panic, didn't react. He simply said to Nicholas, "Then it's time to show them the grip was never mine alone." New York smelled different now. It wasn't just the smog or the butcher shops or the sour beer spilled from too many bars on corners that changed hands every month. It was something deeper, rot. But not in the streets, in the system. The bureau had stopped hiding. Flynn was on the papers now. The arrests were no longer silent, and the headlines weren't asking questions. They were writing verdicts. Morello's men face grand jury indictment. Federal agents inch closer to Black Hand Kingpin. Is the clutch hand slipping? The narrative had shifted. And Giuseppe knew better than anyone, the truth didn't matter. The story did. Nicholas walked into the office with the paper folded under his arm. "Flynn's using your name now," he said. "Not alleged boss, not suspected operator. Just you." Giuseppe lit a cigarette. Calm, precise. "He's trying to shake the pillars." Nicholas dropped the paper on the desk. "He's doing more than shaking them. Gio, this isn't like before. This ain't just cops chasing money." Giuseppe nodded once. He already knew. This was no longer about controlling the streets. This was about surviving the story. That afternoon, he met with Thomas Radcliffe, the assemblyman who owed him favors. They met in a church basement. Always the church. Even the crooked like to feel holy when making deals. Radcliffe arrived nervous, red-faced, shirt damp with sweat. He knew what was coming. "I can't stop this one, Giuseppe." Giuseppe didn't speak at first. He poured wine, passed it across the table, never touched his own. "I asked you for 3 things," he said. Radcliffe gulped. "I gave them to you. You gave me time. Now I need weight." Radcliffe blinked. "What?" Giuseppe leaned in. "I need you to stall the indictments. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Long enough for the press to forget the flavor of my name." Radcliffe shook his head. "They'll know it's me." Giuseppe's voice dropped. "They already know it's me. The question is whether they remember you helped." Radcliffe's hand trembled. "What do I get for it?" Giuseppe stared at him. "Another election," then smiled. Or the opposite. 2 days later, Flynn received notice that his key testimony witness, the dock foreman, Clinton Yeager, had been granted a delay due to illness and that his family was being relocated for safety. He knew it wasn't coincidence, but he couldn't prove it. The case had to wait, and Giuseppe had a window. But windows don't stay open in New York, especially when the glass is already cracking. And one of the cracks? Ciro. Giuseppe hadn't seen him in nearly a month. No word, no mess, just absence. That was what worried him most. The ones who talk, who fight, you can predict them. The quiet ones, they're the ones that haunt you. Nicholas found a name in a telegram. Angelo Rizzo, a small-time Jersey boss with ambitions he hadn't earned. "He's been seen with Ciro 3 times, Nicholas said. Giuseppe nodded. "Then he's selling something." "You think it's us?" Giuseppe looked out the window. The city moved like an animal with too many legs. "I think it's him." Giuseppe knew how men broke. They didn't snap all at once. They cracked in layers. Guilt, resentment, pride. Ciro had all 3, and now he had someone to pour it into. Angelo Rizzo was a snake in cheap silk. He didn't want the city. He wanted Giuseppe's name to stop mattering. That was more dangerous than ambition. That was hatred. A week later, Rizzo was arrested in a sweep. Illegal firearms, 2 stolen cars, unlicensed liquor. Giuseppe wasn't behind it, but he didn't stop it either. And when Ciro showed up at Lena's apartment, blood on his collar, eyes wide with fear, he finally understood what he'd gambled with. Flynn knocked at 2:30 a.m. Ciro didn't open the door, but he knew it was time to go home. The next morning, Ciro stood in Giuseppe's office like a boy being told to sit down in church. Giuseppe didn't look up from his desk. "You walked away from the family," he said. "I didn't flip. You gave someone else the idea that you could." Silence. Giuseppe finally met his eyes. "You gave them permission to question me." Ciro stepped forward. "I didn't say your name. I didn't—" "It doesn't matter what you said," Giuseppe interrupted. "It's what they felt." He stood slowly, walked around the desk. "You think blood protects you?" Ciro's mouth opened. Closed. Then, "I just wanted something that was mine." Giuseppe nodded slowly. "That's what Calogero said." But Giuseppe didn't kill him. He didn't exile him. He didn't even curse him. He did something far worse. He said, "From this moment on, you're nothing more than a worker in this family. You earn what you take. You rise only when others fall." Ciro's face paled. Giuseppe turned his back. "You want something that's yours? Go take it. But not under my name." The message spread fast. Giuseppe had demoted his own brother, and with that, the remaining lieutenants, the ones who'd been waiting, quietly watching. wondering if the old man had gone soft, stopped wondering. No one questioned the throne again. Back at the bureau, Flynn's case was still frozen. Witnesses stalling, documents misplaced, informants missing. The pressure from Washington was building. "We need an arrest," they told him. "Something big, something to save face." Flynn took a gamble. He raided 3 warehouses at once, all known Morello supply points. But they were all clean. Not a box out of place, no cash, no weapons, just warehouses. Flynn punched the wall inside one of them. He'd been outplayed again. Giuseppe sat with Nicholas that night over black coffee and said, "They'll keep circling until they find the body." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "What body?" Giuseppe smiled faintly. "The one we haven't buried yet." The first time Giuseppe thought about death seriously, it wasn't after a shooting. Not after a firebomb. Not even after watching a man bleed out in front of him. It was when he heard a boy say, in a corner bakery, "Morello's still alive. I thought he was a ghost." It was meant as a joke, but it felt like prophecy. He stood alone in the back room of a butcher shop that used to be his war room, the same one where Calagero's war had been plotted, where streets had been carved like a surgeon mapping veins. Now, it felt small, and he felt tired, not sick, not broken, just done with noise. Nicholas walked in, holding a letter. "Jersey's asking to sit down again," he said. "New crew, young." Giuseppe didn't turn around. "Tell them no." Nicholas paused. "They'll come anyway." Giuseppe exhaled slowly. "Then let them come. But not to me." Nicholas stepped closer, watching his brother. "You thinking about stepping back?" Giuseppe didn't answer. He just stared at the knife rack on the wall. The oldest one, the one with the wooden handle and dried rust, was still hanging, untouched. He reached for it, gripped it with his right hand, held it up to the light. "Every man thinks he has one more war in him," Giuseppe said softly, "until the war gets tired of waiting." That week, he summoned 3 men to his house. Not soldiers, not captains, sons, not his by blood, but by structure. Men he had raised through rank, year by year, loyal, clean, careful. Their names were Gianni, Marco, and Dominic. He didn't ask them to sit. He didn't offer drinks. He simply looked at them and said, "What would you do if I disappeared tomorrow?" They didn't answer right away. Then Dominic spoke first. "I'd wait for your name to echo." Giuseppe shook his head. "I'm not asking what you'd feel. I'm asking what you'd do." Marco, the calmest of them, cleared his throat. "I'd make sure nothing moved until we were certain of the chain." Johnny added, "I'd handle the neighborhoods, keep the payments smooth." Giuseppe nodded, then said, "Start now." For the first time, he stepped back, not all at once, but inch by inch. He stopped attending sit-downs, stopped signing off on every loan, every hit, every tax. He let Dominic oversee the gambling spots. Marco took over the Harlem routes. Johnny sat on the dock schedules and handshake deals. It was a test, not to see if they were capable, but to see if they were loyal, without his hand on their shoulder. And in the silence that followed, something unexpected happened. The system worked. Better than expected. Maybe too well, Nicholas noticed first. "You give them power," he said over coffee, "and they move like they've had it for years." Giuseppe nodded. "They've watched long enough." "You sure about this?" Giuseppe didn't answer right away. Then, finally, "A king who needs to be seen is just another man with a crown." But not everyone welcomed the change. Some of the old captains, men who'd survived under Giuseppe's shadow, now saw an opportunity. They weren't stupid, they weren't loud, but they were greedy. One of them, Enrico Dalca, an old war horse from the Brooklyn side, started taxing the numbers crews without permission. Quiet, strategic, opportunistic. But he made one mistake. He taxed Gianni's crew, and Gianni didn't blink. He sent 2 men to Dalca's bakery. They left a note and 2 bullets in the flour bag. "Old horses get shot. New blood rides faster." The message was brutal, effective, but it sparked a ripple. Dalca didn't retaliate. He didn't even flinch. he did something worse. He met with a lawyer, a federal lawyer. The bureau had been quiet. Flynn was quieter now, off the case, replaced by a colder, leaner man from Washington named Harlan Keyes. Keyes didn't believe in publicity. He believed in paperwork. He believed in legacy. And he believed that Giuseppe Morello, whether active or not, needed to answer for history. Galka gave him something useful. You think he's out? He's not. He's just changing uniforms. He offered documents, names, a letter, years old, signed by Giuseppe approving a shipment that had led to 2 deaths. Keyes didn't blink. He took it, then subpoenaed Johnny. It was the first real scare in years. The federal summons arrived without ceremony. No raid, no flash. Just an envelope, handed off by a man in a blue coat who didn't smile. Johnny read it 3 times, then drove straight to the brownstone. He didn't speak. He placed the letter in front of Giuseppe. Giuseppe read it, folded it back, and said, "They don't want you. They want to know if you'll run." Johnny looked him in the eye. "I won't." "Good." Giuseppe stood, walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of red wine. He handed one to Johnny. "Then sit. We'll talk about the day I die." That night was not about war. It was about legacy. Giuseppe laid it out, slow and clear. "They'll come for you like they came for me. They'll use paper, not bullets. And when they do, don't fight like a gangster. Fight like a bookkeeper. Keep clean books, pay the right men, and never be louder than the bricks around you." Johnny nodded, then asked, "What if I lose the fear you built?" Giuseppe's eyes darkened. "You don't need fear. You need structure. Fear dies with the man, but structure lives like disease." Next day, Johnny testified. He said nothing wrong. The Bureau asked questions about payments, operations, Morello's influence. Johnny answered with confidence and exactly 0 detail. Everything was legal. Everything was boring. The feds left with nothing. And Keyes. He stared at the boy on the stand and whispered, "He's better than the old man." But the old man wasn't done yet, because legacy is more than planning. Legacy is burying the past. Giuseppe ordered a final ledger destroyed, the first one, the one from Sicily. It held names, real names, old vendettas, Caloggero's deals, the blood money used to found the Black Hand. He watched it burn in the same stove that once cooked soup for his brothers in the early days. Nicholas stood beside him, arms crossed. "Feels wrong, letting that go." Giuseppe didn't look away from the fire. Wrong would be leaving it for someone who doesn't understand what it cost. And just like that, the past began to disappear. The old Morello was fading, but in his place, a network, a machine, a myth. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. No return address, no markings, just yellowed paper, folded twice, slipped under the door of the brownstone, the way messages used to arrive, back when the streets were still louder than newspapers. Giuseppe picked it up himself. No one else was home. He opened it with a slow, practiced hand, his left trembling faintly now, more from age than the old injury. Inside was a single sentence. "Did you forget Naples?" "I didn't." There was no signature, just an old symbol stamped beneath the words, a dagger wrapped in a coiled rope. Giuseppe hadn't seen it in 30 years, and it turned his stomach cold. Nicholas was the first he called. Not Gianni, not Dominic, not Marco. Blood first, always. They sat in the cellar of the brownstone, low light, brick walls, the smell of old cigars and older memories hanging in the air. Giuseppe laid the letter on the table. Nicholas read it twice, then said, "Naples." Giuseppe nodded. "I thought they were all dead." "They are," Nicholas said carefully. "The ones we knew, the real ones. Then this one's a leftover. Or a son." Giuseppe looked down at his hands, one still steady, one still twisted, the same hand that had ended men, built an empire, and held this city together in silence. "We should have killed the whole bloodline," he muttered. Nicholas didn't argue, because he remembered Naples too, 30 years earlier, before New York, before titles and meetings, before the clutch hand meant anything. Giuseppe had done a job in Naples, A quiet job, a bloody one. It wasn't business, it was family vengeance. An uncle had been killed, a Morello cousin had been dishonored. Back then, things like honor still meant enough to spill an ocean of blood. Giuseppe and 3 others went into Naples and wiped out a small rival clan in one night. 15 men, 2 women, 1 boy, left alive on purpose as a message. "Grow up knowing we let you live," Giuseppe had said, standing over him. "Then die, remembering who didn't let you keep anything." Apparently, the boy remembered. Now, decades later, someone was moving in the city again, quietly. The timing was deliberate, right as Giuseppe loosened his grip and handed over power, whoever this was. They'd been waiting. Nicholas said it first. "You think this is personal?" Giuseppe nodded. "It's not business. Business makes demands. This makes promises." The next morning, Dominic found a note tacked to his windshield. "Your godfather has debts. Make sure he pays them before you're buried with them." It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about humiliation. And that was dangerous. Gianni wanted to strike immediately. He came to the brownstone with 3 of his best men, fire in his eyes. "Give me a name," he said. "Any name. We'll rip out the rot before it spreads." Giuseppe shook his head. "You're thinking like a soldier." Gianni stepped forward. "I am a soldier." "No," Giuseppe said. "You're the next king. And kings don't swing the first sword." Silence stretched. Then Giuseppe handed him the old ledger, not the one from New York, not the cleaned-up version. The Naples pages, half-burned, scrawled in faded ink. Gianni flipped through it, confused. "What is this?" "The part of me that still needs to bleed," Giuseppe said. That night, Gianni, Marco, and Dominic met without Giuseppe. They sat in a rented apartment above a shuttered boxing gym, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and the only sound at night was pipes clanking in the walls. They studied the pages, names, dates, cities, and one name that kept repeating: Alessandro Fiore, a minor soldier in the Naples clan, son of a capo, presumed dead during the purge. But now, Gianni leaned back in his chair. "This name is our crack," Marco nodded. "If he lived, he's got every reason to wait, and he's got every reason to make it personal now." Dominic added, "And he's moving smart. No blood, just whispers, just doubt." Gianni stood. "Then we find him. Before the whispers become knives." They started in the Bronx, where Naples families had migrated decades ago, mostly swallowed up by larger, louder syndicates. But some never joined. Some waited. They spoke to old priests, to barbers who never forgot a face, to widows who still lit candles for men long dead. And the same name kept floating back like a ghost: Alessandro. But not as a boss, as something else, a teacher. In a tiny, broken-down boxing gym off Arthur Avenue, they found him, or someone who looked close enough. He went by Sandro, ran drills for neighborhood kids, kept a tight schedule, smiled rarely, spoke even less. But his eyes, they told the story, the kind of quiet that remembers the sound of screams. Gianni watched him from a parked car across the street for 2 nights, then sent Marco in, just to talk. Marco entered the gym like any tired father, asking about lessons for a nephew who needed discipline. Sandro handed him a paper schedule, didn't look up, then said, "Your shoes are too clean to belong in this part of the Bronx." Marco smiled. "And your face is too familiar not to." Sandro didn't flinch, just looked up, eyes slow. "You here to collect something?" "No," Marco said. "I'm here to ask if you're waiting for us to forget." Another long pause. Then Sandro said, "You think time makes men disappear, but it only makes them sharpen their hate." That night, the Morello family held its first emergency sit-down in almost 6 years. No wine, no food, just maps, names, questions. Giuseppe sat at the head once again. "Do we strike?" Dominic asked. "No," Giuseppe said. "We invite." Gianni frowned. "Invite him?" Giuseppe nodded. "If we corner him, he'll fight. If we give him the chair, he'll talk. And if he lies, then I bury him myself." 3 days later, Alessandro Fiore, Sandro sat across from Giuseppe Morello in a back room behind a wine shop. Two men, one candle between them, no guards, no weapons, just unfinished history. Giuseppe looked at the boy he'd once let live. Now, a man with dead eyes and a stillness he recognized. "You came back," Giuseppe said. Sandro nodded. "You expected me to?" Giuseppe shrugged. "I expected something. I left the door open for it." Sandro tilted his head. "Why let me live?" Giuseppe took a sip of wine. Then, "Because I thought fear would do the work that a bullet couldn't." Sandro stared. "It did. For a long time." Then he leaned forward. "But now I'm not afraid, and I want your empire." For a long time, neither man spoke. The flicker of the candle between them barely kept the darkness off the walls. It danced like a warning, too small, too delicate for a room carrying that much history. Giuseppe sat with his twisted hand resting on the table like always, unmoving, permanent, a scar that learned how to rule. Across from him, Alessandro Fiore, Sandro now, sat upright. His eyes weren't young, though his face still carried the weight of youth. His posture was calm, but his energy was sharp. Too sharp. Giuseppe had known many types of killers. Sandro didn't move like one. He moved like a man with no hesitation left. "You came for war," Giuseppe said quietly. "I came for a seat," Sandro replied. "A seat?" Giuseppe echoed. Sandro nodded. "You took everything from me, my name, my family, my country. So I built something of my own, small, quiet, clean. And now I want more." Giuseppe studied him. "You could have taken it, quietly, the way I did. You chose a message instead." Sandro shrugged. "You taught me well." That made Giuseppe pause. He didn't like the way that sounded, as if this wasn't his enemy, but his student. And maybe that was worse. "I've already handed off most of what matters," Giuseppe said. "To who?" Sandro asked. "Johnny? The one who still looks for your approval in every breath? Or Tyro, the brother who tried to become you and failed?" Giuseppe's jaw tightened, just barely. Sandro smiled. "I've been watching. I'm not here to blow up your system. I'm here to inherit it, not as a servant, as an heir." Giuseppe took a long sip of wine, then exhaled slow. "Tell me something," he said. "You think you're owed this?" Sandro didn't blink. "I think I earned it. And you spared me for a reason." Giuseppe set the glass down with care. "I spared you to teach your bloodline a lesson. You were the example, not the exception." A silence settled between them. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but it wasn't peace either. Two men sitting across from each other with 1,000 ghosts between them. Finally, Giuseppe said, "If I give you a seat, you'll still want the table." Sandro nodded. "I won't lie to you." Giuseppe looked away, then back. "That's your mistake." Later that night, Nicholas found Giuseppe alone, standing in the back alley behind the wine shop, smoking a cigar he didn't enjoy. "He wants in," Nicholas said. Giuseppe didn't respond. He came for blood once, now he's here for bone. Still silence. Nicholas pressed, "Do you believe him?" Giuseppe exhaled a long stream of smoke. "I believe he's not done talking." 2 nights later, Giuseppe sent Johnny to visit Sandro's gym. Not with soldiers, not with guns, with a question. "If Giuseppe were to give you 10 blocks and no strings, what would you do with them?" Sandro didn't hesitate. "I'd make them talk about me." That answer made Johnny pause. It wasn't about business, not loyalty, not legacy, image. And that scared him. Because Giuseppe had spent his entire life in shadows, using fear, silence, respect. A man who wanted the spotlight was a man who would burn everything just to see his own name in lights. When Johnny returned, Giuseppe asked one thing. "Is he another Calogero?" Johnny thought a long time. No, Calogero was loud because he was insecure. Sandro is quiet because he's waiting for people to ask who he is. Giuseppe nodded once. "That's worse." Despite it all, Giuseppe didn't move against him. He didn't strike first, not because he couldn't, but because he needed to know one more thing. He needed to understand what Sandro had built, where it started, how far it reached. So he sent Dominic, smart, low profile, good with records, to dig. What Dominic found changed everything. Sandro wasn't alone. He had 3 key earners beneath him, an operation built on high-stakes underground boxing, illegal gambling rings in Queens, and blackmail material on at least 2 politicians and 1 district judge. And the worst part? One of Sandro's earners used to work for Giuseppe. His name was Bruno Falcone, a driver, low-level, quiet, gone for years, now reappeared as Sandro's primary enforcer. Dominic brought the name to Gianni. Gianni brought it to Giuseppe. Giuseppe just closed his eyes and said, "So this was always the plan." There comes a point in a man's life, especially a man like Giuseppe, when he can see the exact spot where everything will fall apart. And that spot was now. Not in a war, not in a betrayal, in a choice. Let Sandro in and risk corrupting everything he built, or kill him and start a war that would turn every corner of the city into an echo of the past. Giuseppe didn't fear violence, but he feared being forgotten as just another killer. He made the decision 2 nights later. He asked Sandro for a second meeting. Same room, same candle. Sandro arrived on time. This time, no smirk, no speech. Giuseppe spoke first. "You've been watching me for years, learning, calculating." Sandro said nothing. "I know what you want. I know why you want it." He leaned forward. "And I'm going to give it to you." Sandro raised an eyebrow. "You are?" Giuseppe nodded. "But not the way you think." Over the next 10 minutes, Giuseppe laid out a new proposal. Sandro would take over 3 borough routes, cleaned and vetted. He'd answer to Gianni, not Giuseppe. He'd be official, but under watch. And if he ever moved without permission, his entire line would disappear, not just him. Sandro didn't flinch. He said, "That's a cage," Giuseppe replied. "No, that's a leash. And if you pull it too far, it'll tighten around your neck." Sandro stood. "Why give me anything at all?" Giuseppe lit a fresh cigar. "Because better the wolf you can see than the one hunting in fog." Then, quietly, "And because I'm tired of killing sons who never asked to be born into blood." That night, Gianni and Dominic watched from a rooftop across the street. Gianni turned to Dominic and said, "You think he made the right call?" Dominic didn't answer right away. Then, "Ask me in 6 months. If we're still breathing, maybe." In the months following Sandro's adoption into the Morello structure, New York held its breath. There was no blood, no bodies, no fires, just a slow, crawling shift in tone, the way names were said, the way captains paused before answering to Gianni, the way certain hands stayed a second longer on a gun under a table. Giuseppe could feel it, even in his silence, especially in it. Because what he'd done wasn't just strategic, it was sacrilege to some. He brought in a man who should have died 30 years ago, and no amount of calm meetings or shared turf erased that blood. Gianni took the change seriously. He'd been given the keys. Now he had to prove he could lock doors as well as open them. He doubled collections, tightened the schedules, banned all side deals for 6 months across every crew. It wasn't cruelty. It was a message. The name Morello still means control. Most obeyed, a few tested, and one, Sal, 3 fingers. Greco, an old enforcer who had survived 3 regimes, decided he had waited long enough. Sal didn't go to Sandro. He didn't need to. He simply started charging his own tax on the Harlem numbers crews, money that was supposed to go to Gianni's operation. When it came time to deliver the envelopes, they were light by $2,300. Gianni knew immediately. He didn't send a warning. He sent Dominic. Dominic found Sal in a cigar parlor on 116th, playing cards, 4 guards around him, no weapons drawn, just eyes. Dominic walked in alone. He didn't sit. He just placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a photo, a young man from Sal's crew, found face down in the river with his hands zip-tied behind his back. No bruises, no bullet, just a message. Sal opened it, looked at Dominic. "You blaming me for something?" Dominic said. No, we're blaming you for nothing, and that's what you'll be if this happens again. He walked out. Sal never touched another dollar that wasn't his again. But not all tests came from inside. Some came from Sandro's rise. And it didn't take long for the other crews, the old families in Brooklyn and the newer Neapolitans in Queens, to sniff weakness. They didn't come for war. They came with meetings, with smiles, with offers dressed as favors. And every one of them had the same hidden question. Is the Morello name still iron, or is it starting to rust? One of those offers came from Frankie Barisi, an uptown loan shark who'd been waiting 2 years for Giuseppe to die off so he could take over Midtown. He requested a sit-down with Gianni. They met at an empty nightclub at noon. No music, just dust. Frankie brought no men. Gianni brought 2, just in case. They sat in a booth with a bottle between them. Frankie lit a cigarette. Listen, kid, you're doing good. I ain't here to rattle you. Gianni didn't speak. Frankie kept going. I'm just saying, now that Sandro's on board, there's room for more flexibility, you know? We could maybe widen the bridge between your half and mine. Split some dock contracts, share talent. Gianni sipped water, then said, if I gave you my docks, I'd be begging for my name back in 6 months. Frankie laughed. You sound like your old man. Gianni didn't laugh. He said, that's because I haven't buried him yet. And he walked out. Word spread fast. Johnny Morello wasn't a mouthpiece. He was a wall. But while the crews were starting to respect him, Sandro, they watched him. Carefully. Too carefully. Because Sandro didn't make mistakes. Didn't step on toes. Didn't demand more turf. He did exactly what was asked of him. And that made him dangerous. Dominic told Gianni one night in the car. Loyal dogs bark. Gianni looked over. And Sandro's too quiet. Then came the first fire. It started in a storage building on Roosevelt, 2 hours after midnight. The building held records, old shipping logs from Giuseppe's peak years, some coded cash trails, some names tied to judges and businesses. It went up in 30 minutes. Fire department ruled it an accident. But the timing, perfect. It happened the night before the Bureau was set to issue new subpoenas, a coincidence that saved the Morellos from a fresh investigation. Johnny didn't believe in coincidences. He asked Dominic to trace it, quietly. 3 days later, Dominic returned with a name. Bruno Falcone started the fire. Bruno, Sandro's man. Johnny sat in the brownstone with Giuseppe and Nicholas that evening. Johnny laid it out straight. He moved without asking. Nicholas said, maybe he was protecting us. Johnny looked at Giuseppe. If he did this for us, why hide it? Giuseppe didn't speak for a while. Then, because a man who hides loyalty is saving it for someone else. The next night, Johnny called Sandro. A quiet meeting. Private. Same room where Sandro had first sat across from Giuseppe. This time, Johnny took Giuseppe's chair. Sandro noticed and smirked slightly. You've settled in well. Johnny ignored the comment. You've got a man who lit a fire. Unapproved. Sandro's expression stayed still. If he did, it wasn't sanctioned. Johnny nodded. Then hand him over. Sandro tilted his head. That's a big ask for something that helped you. Helping me in secret is still moving without permission, Johnny replied. That's how war starts. Sandro leaned forward. You sure this is a war you can win? Johnny didn't blink. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to rule. Silence. Then Sandro stood. I'll talk to him. Gianni shook his head. No, you'll bring him. Or I'll take him. 3 days passed. No sign of Bruno. Then Dominic got word from a contact in Jersey. A man matching his description got on a boat heading south, disappeared off the map. Sandro came to the brownstone personally, tense, apologetic on the surface, but behind his eyes, still that dead calm. Bruno's gone, he said. I didn't order it, but I can't find him. Johnny stood across the room, arms folded. You ever hear the phrase, loyalty is a leash? Sandro nodded. Then tell me why yours is dragging. Giuseppe, seated quietly, finally spoke. He'll make one more move. Johnny and Sandro both turned to him. Men like him, Giuseppe said. They don't run to hide. They run to build elsewhere. Now the question wasn't whether Sandro was trustworthy. It was whether Bruno was gone to protect his mentor, or gone to create a rival throne. Johnny knew what had to happen next. Not another meeting, not another message, a strike. Not at Sandro, at the image of invincibility. Johnny couldn't afford to look like he was waiting to be betrayed. So he gathered his top 5 captains. They rolled through Sandro's numbers territory in broad daylight. No violence, no warnings. They showed up, took a cut, told the locals who was in charge, and when word got back to Sandro, Johnny didn't wait for him to react. He sent one line. "Your leash has slack. I'm tightening it." Giuseppe sat in his old chair, the leather torn near the left armrest, the legs uneven on the tile, the smell of blood and tobacco deep in its bones. Outside, the city moved like it always did, fast, loud, greedy, but inside, the brownstone was quiet, too quiet. For a man who had once made half of Manhattan pause just by not smiling, silence now tasted like rust in his mouth. He was tired, not weak, just aware. Aware that the clock he'd ignored all these years was now louder than ever. Gianni came in without knocking. He carried a folder, the kind that usually meant bad news, but dressed up like facts. Giuseppe didn't turn to look. He just said, "Bruno." Johnny nodded, placing the folder on the desk. "Florida. Started building with some Cuban crews. Rumor is he's calling himself something new, something separate." Giuseppe sighed. "And Sandro?" "Quiet. He's either preparing to fall in line or waiting to make us flinch first." Giuseppe turned slowly. His eyes were cloudier now, but not dull. "You think he still answers to you?" Johnny hesitated. "No." Giuseppe nodded, as if that was exactly the answer he expected. Later that night, Nicholas found him in the backyard garden, the tiny square of green space the old man had kept since the 1920s. Giuseppe was watering the basil plants. "Been quiet in here?" Nicholas said, lighting a cigarette. Giuseppe chuckled dryly. "Louder than I expected, honestly." Nicholas walked up beside him. He looked old too now, but not tired like Giuseppe. Not yet. "We've built something that's outlived the streets," he said. "You know that, right?" Giuseppe nodded. "I also know it's still made of men, and men don't last." Nicholas looked him in the eye. "You think Johnny can hold it?" Giuseppe didn't answer, because he didn't know. The next week, Sandro made his move, not with violence, not with fire, but with something more dangerous. He called a sit-down, not in secret, in public, an invite-only dinner in Queens, all the young crews, all the middlemen, none of the old guard, except one chair left open, Gianni's. Gianni didn't attend. He knew what it meant. He knew Sandro was measuring how many hands would reach for forks when the king wasn't at the table. And when the reports came back, they weren't comforting. Sandro spoke like a politician, talked about modernizing the system, about profit over tradition, about opening up the roots to new blood. Not one shot fired, but something much worse. Applause. When Gianni brought the news to Giuseppe, he was calm. Too calm. "He's not taking turf," Johnny said. "He's taking faith." Giuseppe closed his eyes. "Faith is harder to steal," he muttered, "but easier to lose." Johnny stepped forward. "We have to hit back." Giuseppe opened his eyes. "No. We have to decide if we want to stay kings or become ghosts." Johnny froze. "You thinking of walking away?" "I'm thinking," Giuseppe said slowly, "of what happens after we stop being needed." But the city didn't wait, because the city was already choosing. Crews started calling Sandro directly. Mid-level earners began shifting product routes. A few captains started paying late, not because they forgot, but to test the leash. Johnny wanted to pull hard, strike fast, but Giuseppe stopped him. "You know what I learned after killing my first rival?" he said one morning, cutting bread at the kitchen table. Johnny shook his head. Giuseppe smiled without humor. "That it doesn't stop anything. It just changes the language of fear." Johnny sat down. "Then what stops it?" Giuseppe looked up. "Nothing. You just live long enough that they stop looking at you like a man and start calling you a myth. Johnny swallowed hard. I don't want to be a myth. I want to lead. Giuseppe nodded. Then bury me before I'm dead. Johnny didn't understand what he meant at first, until Giuseppe handed him the black book. Not the ledgers, not the death list. This was something else, something older, a will, written in faded ink, signed with a blood thumbprint. I wrote this in 1910, Giuseppe said, in case they got me before I built anything real. Johnny opened it. Inside were instructions: who to trust, who to ignore. Which captains were never to be given power, what routes were fronts, and which ones mattered. And at the very bottom, a list of men labeled "should not survive me." Sandro's name was not on the list. Bruno's was. That night, Johnny sat with Nicholas and Dominic. He laid out the pages, told them what Giuseppe had said, and then asked the hardest question: do we end this with bullets or with a grave? Nicholas said nothing, but Dominic finally replied, "Bullets start echoes, a grave ends one." Johnny nodded. The next morning, the city woke to news that shook every corner of the underground. Giuseppe Morello was dead. Heart failure in his sleep, natural causes, quiet funeral, closed casket, only family, the clutch hand, finally still. But it wasn't true, not completely. The body buried in the casket was a cousin, an old look-alike, died months earlier. Giuseppe? He was on a train, southbound, out of New York forever. No empire, no guards, no legacy, just a name that would now grow in legend. Because the myth of Giuseppe Morello was more powerful than the man ever was. Sandro didn't react publicly, but privately, he stopped pushing. He stopped calling meetings. He stopped talking about modernization, because even if he didn't believe it, everyone else did. And now that Giuseppe was dead, everyone started listening to Johnny. 3 months later, Bruno Falcone was found, shot twice in the chest, buried under sand near Tampa. Sandro never asked questions, and the Morello name kept flowing. Back in a small town near Savannah, Georgia, a man named Joseph Marino lived in a quiet farmhouse. He had a crooked hand. He grew tomatoes. And sometimes, when the wind hit just right, he'd sit on the porch, close his eyes, and smile. Not because he missed the city, but because he'd done something most men like him never do. He'd walked away before it buried him, and left behind a myth that no bullet could touch.